So Tottenham backed up what was an impressive performance, albeit in defeat, against PSG in the Super Cup with, again, an impressive performance on the opening weekend of the Premier League season against Burnley. James, I know you spent time with Spurs on tour, and we're also in Italy for that Super Cup tie. What have you made of Spurs so far under Thomas Frank? I appreciate this. We're dealing in kind of weeks rather than months, but have you been impressed so far, do you think?
Yeah, I think he's found the job a step up, certainly, in terms of the scrutiny that's on him. I was told that he likes to go for a run very early in the mornings, and he tried to do it at the team hotel, outside the team hotel in Hong Kong, and had to sort of be told by one or two of the executives, you might not be able to do this, as Tottenham manager, and not be bothered by people. You might be, it's fine. With all due respect to Brentford, if you come as Brentford manager, there aren't going to be as many people who know you. There's many more eyes on you here. So I think just little things like that where and I know that he went to one of the fan events when he was in Hong Kong, was kind of taken aback by just the number of people in the room and the enthusiasm and the sort of fandom for Spurs there. So I think there's a period of adjustment for him, but I think what will really encourage Tottenham fans is the fact that there's a clear sort of Thomas Frank imprint on the team already. They look a lot more organised defensively, set pieces, which I never understood. I quite liked Ange Postecoglou, I have to say, even though I, like many of us, were on the receiving end of some of his sharper comments at times. But the stick that beat with him so often was the fact that he sort of dismissed this idea of a set piece. Goes, why do we need it? What's the point? It's sort of farcical. There's so much, attention to it. Yes, we do work on it, but it doesn't have to be this big thing. And you just think, well, that's such an outlier with the sort of modern trend in the Premier League that every time they concede the goal from set piece, it's like, well, this is clearly something you need to work on. And yet you look at Tottenham now, and of course, both of their goals against Paris Saint-Germain came from set pieces. They were a constant threat. And they look just much better balanced. I mean, obviously, the sort of high-risk, high-line Postecoglou style was an extreme version of football that Thomas Frank didn't really have to do too much apart from drop the defensive line 25 yards, and suddenly you do look better balanced. But just in the way that they play, the way that they've the patterns of play, you can see, I'd be really encouraged if I was a Tottenham fan that he's having that impact already.
Right, so you say they'll be really encouraged if you're a Tottenham fan. I get that because Spurs are much more organised than they were last season under Ange. But I remember 2 years ago, the Tottenham fans fell in love with Ange, the way they played. And we know that Tottenham fans have a certain way of playing. They love playing a certain way. Now, I was watching the Super Cup against PSG, and I was kind of surprised by long throw-ins, goalkeeper taking free kicks from just outside the centre circle, lots of long balls, long diagonal passes forward. It's effective, but considering Tottenham fans are maybe unique in what they expect from their team, how long will it last before they start grumbling about the football?
Yeah, I mean, that is a valid criticism. I mean, it should be said that sort of part of the piece that there were 10 criteria that the Tottenham executives identified that they wanted in their candidates to succeed Postecoglou, and one of them was style of play. And they felt that Thomas Frank's style of play at football at Brentford was suitable for Spurs. So they feel he'll get there. And I thought it was quite interesting, actually, that when I spoke to him before his press conference before the Burnley game on Friday, and sort of asked him about how he felt they were going into the season. Were they ready, basically? And he said, well, look, defensively, there are principles of play that you can see, and we feel as though we've come a long way in a short period of time there. But he said, from an attacking point of view, and it's a different kind of game, I would say, to your point, Mark, that I think that was quite a specific game plan because they were playing the European champions. I'm not sure they'll always be on the back foot like that. And Thomas Frank is a very versatile, adaptable manager. That's a clear difference between him and Postecoglou, who, we are who we are, mate. We'll do what we do, and what will be, will be. Thomas Frank will devise specific game plans and adapt as necessary. But Thomas Frank was very clear in saying, look, from an attacking sense, we're not quite there. And there's a number of reasons for that. Of course, they've lost James Maddison to injury. They've not had Dejan Kulusevski for the whole of pre-season. And one of their leading targets, Morgan Gibbs-White, they thought they had got him over the line. And of course, he ended up signing a new deal at Nottingham Forest. So they're looking at, as I know Rob and I both reported, Savinho at City. They're trying to advance the deal for Eberechi Eze at Crystal Palace. They get one or both of those players, and it looks very different. I think Kudus has looked really good in the 2 games that he's played under Frank, and there's sort of something to build on there, definitely. But you can understand why that attacking sort of side of the game is not quite clicked yet. I think he will need a bit of time to get that right.
You just mentioned Eze there, James. I mean, where are Spurs up to with that? Is that a deal that you think is likely to get done? And is there any possibility? I know Arsenal have been linked with him in the past. That Arsenal swoop in out of nowhere and nick him from under Spurs' nose.
Yeah, it's possible because it's not done. But the noises I've heard over the weekend, speaking to somebody who's got knowledge of the deal, who sort of suggested that Tottenham are now the clear front runners to sign him. I think they've had, by the sounds of it, some positive noises from the players' side about wanting to come to Spurs, which again is not to say that if Arsenal suddenly appeared out of nowhere with a big money bid, and the valuation I think is still a bit of an issue. There was a release clause that expired earlier this month, which has obviously complicated things a little bit because it affects both parties' valuation of the player. But of course, if Arsenal came in with a big offer, then that would give Eze something to think about. It's obviously a team that's growing for the league, but both sides have Champions League football this season. So win, so he would be playing in Europe's premier competition. At the moment, it's not done, but Spurs are clearly ahead of everybody else, and I think there's a growing confidence among the sort of Spurs end that they are going to get this over the line.
Sorry, Tottenham fans, but is Eze not too good for Tottenham? Is he not? Does he not deserve has he not earned a move to a bigger club than Spurs? I mean, look, Spurs in the Champions League, I get it, but if you're looking at the clubs right now that are competing for the biggest honours, Spurs aren't one of them, are they? Spurs are a team that has got a long way to come back from last season. Eze is a really good player, England international, big part of Palace's FA Cup win last year. Look, if it's Arsenal v Tottenham for Eze, there's only one winner for me, and that's Arsenal. But I'm just surprised that he's not attracted bigger and better teams than Tottenham.
Yeah, well, I think the Palace's reluctance to sell was a factor, and remains so. I don't think it's an easy deal to do. They've obviously had, against their will, really had a significant churn of players. You think about Elise going, Anderson. You've got obviously Gay, probably going to go either this summer or certainly next. The indication there is that he's not going to sign a new deal sort of under any circumstances. And they obviously don't want that team that's won the FA Cup and has been so impressive under Glasner to sort of fall apart. But yeah, look, I mean, I suppose from Tottenham's point of view, this is where things like the stadium, the training ground, state of the art, all of that, and they can sort of say to him, look, you are going to be our main man, which of course Arsenal can't necessarily do that. It might appeal to him more to say, be a squad player at Arsenal, not play every week, or say to him at Tottenham, well, look, you can come in and you can be our number 10. You're going to, James Maddison's out for the season, and you can argue that Eze's an upgrade on Maddison anyway. But obviously Maddison's out for a long period of time. We need you to stitch this all together. We've got a manager in Thomas Frank who, I've been fortunate enough to spend a bit of time with Thomas Frank sort of away from football. And he is a really engaging character. I can see why players want to play for him. And he's the sort of guy who could convince someone like Eze, who would have options, to come and play for him. So I think you're being a little harsh on Spurs. I get the point, but it's an attractive package all in. And the other thing, of course, is that he's not going to be on huge wages at Palace. And, that's quite often the issue for Tottenham, is they can't really shop at the top end of the market because they just don't pay the top wages. They can do that with Eze. They can give him a real big bump and still keep him within their wage structure. And incidentally, my sort of understanding is on the wage bill, because it's so well controlled, I think there's an ambition there to get a bit more aggressive with the wages going forward with Spurs. I think you'll see that over the next couple of years, that they are going to try and not necessarily go and get an Isak, and pay huge money, but I think that they're trying to pay their best players a bit more and then obviously become more attractive to new signings because they can offer more money in salaries.
Just sorry, Rob, before jumping on Savinho, just a bit of context on Eze. The point is he's 27, so I think this is his big move, isn't it? This is his time for his big move, and at that age, I don't know. I just think he could find a bigger and better team, because at 27 you're not going to get another big move. But I take your point. But Rob, I know you want to ask James about Savinho, so dive in.
Well, yeah, I mean, the message on Savinho from City has been that they don't want to let him go. I know Pep was quite effusive about him in his news conference on Friday, saying that he wanted Savinho to stay at City for many, many years. That said, we also know that City's policy with things like this is that if a player goes and knocks on the manager's door or Hugo Viana's door and says, I want to go, usually they're allowed to leave. City have sort of said that they would look for a fee that's in excess of £50 million. Do you think that Tottenham is it Eze and Savinho? Is it one or the other? Have they got the financial ability to go and do both those deals if it's going to be beyond sort of £100 million for the two of them?
Yeah, they can do both. They've got plenty of headroom with PSR, and as I say, obviously, wage bill is one aspect of that, and their wage bill is really tightly controlled. So they've got room to do both. And my understanding is that they do want to make at least 2 attacking signings before the window closes. So whether they get one or both of them remains to be seen. But yeah, look, I mean, we all know the interest is there. The other element, of course, is that there are a number of people who you can talk to if you want to do a deal at Spurs. I mean, there's Johan Lange, obviously, he's the technical director there. There's Thomas Frank, the manager, who's involved to some extent in the recruitment. There's Vinay Venkateshan, the new CEO, who's gone in there this summer. And also there's Fabio Paratici, who is, well, technically banned, but is able to act as a consultant for the club. Interesting that he was sat next to Johan in Udine, and he's been sort of a prominent presence. So I think he's somebody who, is playing an active role and is listening. And obviously we all know with transfers that, if you've got somebody connected to a club who's listening to a conversation or listening to offers or is sort of moving in those worlds, that's often where the interest starts to generate, and then people can kind of take it, to wherever they want to go. But look, they are interested in both. They could sign both, but as ever with Spurs, they have to pay the money, and there is a little bit of reluctance to do that. But there are at least now more voices in that conversation than just Daniel Levy holding the purse strings.
It's interesting with that one, the Savinho one, because we were away with City at the Club World Cup, and there was obviously lots of talk at that time about Rodrigo at Real Madrid, and City had sort of suggested that he had been offered to clubs in the Premier League, City being one, just to kind of sound out whether there was any kind of interest. And City at that time were quite cool on that and kind of not fully backed away from it, but weren't really kind of bigging it up. Obviously, they weren't really expecting, or I doubt they were expecting Spurs to come in for Savinho. But if Savinho was to go, if Spurs were to meet their valuation and Savinho was to go, you'd expect that Pep or Hugo Viana would want someone in to replace him, and that potentially would open up a route for Rodrigo to go from Real Madrid to Man City. Now, that deal would be very, very expensive. I think the numbers in Spain are kind of 100 million plus, and then his wage on top of that. But because of City's PSR position, it's probably a deal that they could do. And as good as Savinho has been for his one season in the Premier League, and he probably was one of the only players to come out of last season with any kind of credit, because he was so young and it was his first year in the Premier League, and City fans and Pep loves him. I think a lot of City fans may look at that and think, well, actually, if there's a chance to get 50 plus million for Savinho and reinvest that in Rodrigo, who is still a young player himself, and having seen what he's been able to do for Real Madrid, it's maybe two deals that City fans would look at and think, well, that's actually works in our favour a little bit, that a City attack that has Rodrigo, Haaland, Phil Foden, Doku, Reinders, Ryan Shirky coming off the bench, it is even more formidable than it is already. And I think some City fans may look at that and think they're quite hopeful that those two deals may get over the line.